Now, our next talk is on future relations between Israel and the U.S. Jewish community, and it's led by one of my favorite writers, and I'm going to sound like a total fangirl, but that's okay, Yossi Klein Halevi. Now, yes, exactly, yes. So, Yossi Klein Halevi is a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute and co-director of its Muslim Leadership Institute. He writes frequently on the Middle East, for Times of Israel and other publications as well. He writes about Israeli music, spirituality, for leading North American newspapers and magazines. He has long been active in reconciliation efforts between Muslims and Jews and serves as chair of Open House, an Arab-Jewish coexistence center. Let's put our hands together for Yossi Klein Halevi.
Thank you, and good afternoon. We've heard an extraordinarily rich conversation today. To my mind, one of the very best conversations on American Jewish-Israeli relations that I've ever heard. And it's really a privilege to be here. And I think that what makes this conversation all the more extraordinary is that the Israelis who are presenting are profoundly jet-lagged. And it occurred to me this morning that one of the key reasons for the misunderstanding between the diaspora and Israel is that whenever we get together in these kinds of forums, either here or in Israel, one side is deeply jet-lagged. And maybe what we need to do is find some neutral time zone and have a real conversation in which both sides are functioning. To some extent, misunderstandings and conflicts are unavoidable in our relationship. You live in the most hospitable conditions that Jews have ever experienced. And we in Israel live in the least hospitable place on the planet. Inhospitable not only for Jews, but for everyone who lives in the Middle East. And as a result of these opposite geographical circumstances, each community has devised an opposite strategy for coping. Our strategy is to be tough. The American Jewish strategy is to be flexible. Our dilemma in Israel is that the strategy that works for us in the Middle East, the tougher we are, the safer we are in the Middle East, that same strategy backfires in the liberal West. And that, of course, is where most American Jews live, in liberal America. Yehuda Kurtzer, my colleague and friend from the Hartman Institute, mentioned the changes in Israeli demographics in impacting on the attenuation of that sense of ethnic intimacy that Ashkenazi American Jews once felt toward Ashkenazi Israel. But I also think there's another less spoken difference between the two communities, and that is a profound class difference. American Jewry is a white-collar community. It has become a white-collar community. And I would argue that Israel is, in its essence, a blue-collar country. Now, of course, we have a significant white-collar presence in Israel, but even white-collar Israelis are in some way part of a blue-collar culture by the very fact of participation in the military. And the Israeli army, like any army, is a blue-collar culture. It's a blue-collar experience. During the last Gaza war, some of you may recall that an IDF spokesman referred to the need for Israel to periodically send the army into Gaza, and the expression he used was to mow the grass, lekaseach et hadeshe. This expression outraged a number of American Jewish intellectuals. They saw this as a callous expression of a lack of regard for human life. And I remember hearing that expression and saying, well, you know, that's really a very moderate approach to our problem in Gaza. At least we're not going to be aiming for toppling the Hamas regime in this war. And interestingly, in Israeli society, this expression went completely unremarked. It did create an upheaval here. And I think that that's part of the disconnect. It is a linguistic disconnect, and more profoundly, an expression of the very different experiences that each community has. We are a militarized society, not a militaristic, but we are a militarized society. And American Jewry is a demilitarized society. This is an American Jewish generation that does not know the military experience. And so that is built in to the disconnect. We have very different experiences of Jewish pluralism. Your Jewish pluralism is religious, is denominational. Our Jewish pluralism is ethnic. And we each function in very different Jewish ways. You function as communities, and communities are self-selecting entities and fairly homogeneous. We function as a people, which is inherently a messy construct. We have to adjust with Jews, groups of Jews, whose ideologies we may find abhorrent, and yet they are part of our organic entity. And the reason we have coalition systems in Israel is precisely because we don't function as self-contained communities, but as a messy people. Now, for all of that, we are two communities that are fated to remain in intimate relations. And there is a negative reason for this, and there is a more inspired reason. The negative is that after 2 centuries of uprooting of Jewish communities around the world, our two communities are essentially what's left of the Jewish people, with a few shluchot, a few outposts around the diaspora, but Europe is winding down, and by the end of this generation, the 2,000-year Jewish history in Europe may well be coming to an end. 85% of the world's Jews live today in our two communities, and those numbers, I believe, are only going to grow. Now, the more positive, inspiring challenge that faces us is, as has been said here through the day, we are two extraordinary experiments in Jewish history. On the one hand, in Israel, we are creating a sovereign Jewish space, and you here have the opportunity to influence the public space of the most important country in the world. You are not only tolerated in that public space, you are actively welcomed and invited to contribute Jewish values, insights, causes, needs. And so we have simultaneously, and this is really what is so extraordinary about this moment in Jewish history, because either of these experiments on its own would have been enough to fundamentally transform Jewish life for generations to come. The fact that these two experiments emerged almost simultaneously is really an unprecedented situation in Jewish life. And I know that Jewish discourse tends to focus on the problems, and we need to deal with the problems, but at the same time, every so often, we need to step back and just marvel at the riches that we've inherited from the previous generation. How then do we enhance each other's Jewish experience? How do we ensure that each community is able to maximize the potential that history has given us? And I'd like to offer here a few suggestions, partly distilled from what I was hearing all day, and to offer perhaps some guidelines in how our two communities can more effectively relate to each other. And I'll begin from the negative and move to the positive. The negative is we need to avoid apocalyptic judgments about each other's Jewish life. Whether it is an article that appears in a Jewish publication, as did recently, by a Jewish leader saying that Israel is a failed experiment and essentially telling us that it's over, or whether what we routinely hear from certain Israeli politicians dismissing American Jewry as another failed experiment. American Jewry is doomed. You're not even real Jews. This kind of rhetoric that has become a constant soundtrack in our relationship, and it is profoundly debilitating. We need to accommodate each other's Jewish anxieties. The Jewish people today is divided between two anxieties. One anxiety is primarily focused on the external threats facing us, whether it's Iran, whether it is what is happening on Israel's borders, whether it's the situation of Jews in Europe. And the other part of the Jewish people is focusing on the internal threats facing us, whether it is the ongoing occupation of another people, whether it is the weakening of certain democratic norms or attitudes in parts of the Israeli people. And so we need, in our relationship, we need to accommodate both of those anxieties. I noticed that, again, over the course of the day, there was selective applause. There were those who applauded those invoking the external threats and those who applauded those invoking the internal threats. And I would really like, personally, I would like to see no applause at all, because I think that when we have serious conversations, we shouldn't be turning it into a rally and a pep talk. And this has been a profoundly serious day. But at the very least, to be able to recognize, acknowledge, and honor the anxieties that Jews feel, because those anxieties are expressions of Jewish reality and also of Jewish values. Some comments about American Jewish criticism of Israel. I have to say that it is an issue that I don't really understand. First of all, because every person, every human being has the right to an opinion on any country, any policy of any country, anywhere in the planet, with the exception of American Jews who are not allowed to have an opinion or criticize Israeli policies. That is not a healthy basis for our relationship. My starting point is that a fundamental requirement of Jewish citizenship is that we take the time to seriously think about the implications of Israeli policies, American Jewish attitudes, behavior, that we begin to seriously engage each other, and again, in a values conversation about the implications of our various policies. From my point of view, an American Jew is empowered, has the responsibility to engage us and, if necessary, criticize us on any and every policy. A few caveats, because there always are caveats. One is that criticism is not a substitute for a healthy relationship. If criticism becomes the sole basis for an American-Jewish relationship with Israel, and we are seeing signs of that developing in certain circles, where the only relationship is, we oppose you. And the British Jewish novelist Howard Jacobson parodied that approach when he wrote about an imaginary organization of left-wing Jews called Proud to be Ashamed. And so we need to not just allow criticism, but encourage criticism as part of a much richer relationship. What I need from American Jewish critics is a sense of understanding the agonizing complexity of Israel's dilemmas, not to trivialize our dilemmas. Most Israelis today feel that we have exhausted our options on the Palestinian issue, which is why there is virtually no debate in Israel today about the Palestinians. We feel, most of us, or I'll say many of us, or maybe I should just say myself, that the settlement movement failed, already in the first Intifada in the late 1980s, the dream of a complete land of Israel failed then. The peace movement failed in the second Intifada. Unilateral withdrawal failed in 2005 in Gaza. And so we don't know what to do. Put another way, most Israelis, and here I will go so far as to say a majority of Israelis, I believe, have two anxieties, two nightmares about a Palestinian state. The first is that there won't be a Palestinian state and the status quo will continue indefinitely. And the second is that there will be a Palestinian state and we could find another version of Syria or Iraq or Libya, God forbid, 5 minutes away from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, or inside Jerusalem. So I need partners in complexity and partners in anguish. What I often hear when I speak to American Jewish communities is denial. When I speak in Orthodox communities, right-wing communities, I'll hear that there's no such thing as an occupation. We're not occupying another people. Or there's no such thing even as that people. The Palestinian people don't exist. That is not part of a normative Israeli discourse. Sharon spoke about the occupation of the Palestinians. Netanyahu speaks of the Palestinian people. That argument, that discourse belongs to the 1980s. When I speak to liberal Jewish communities, it's a different kind of denial. We have a peace partner. It's all up to us. We need to have the will. We need to just sign the damn deal. We all know what the deal looks like. And that's a discourse that belongs to 1990s Israel. And the discourse in Israel today is yes to both dilemmas. Yes, we need a Palestinian state. Yes, we cannot have a Palestinian state. And so we are stalemated against us because the left and the right each won a certain argument and each lost a certain argument. When we speak about criticism, we need to make space for reciprocal criticism, reciprocal critique of each other's failures. Again, from a place of mutual respect and mutual love. And here I'll disagree briefly with my beloved colleague Yehuda Kurtzer. Yes, we are a family. Yes, we are often a dysfunctional family. Yes, we must remain a family because no other model will have the vitality to sustain us. But within that family model, criticism, mutual criticism, corrective criticism is essential. And so as an Israeli, I have to tell you how profoundly disappointed, and I'm using Lashon Hamat, I'm understating it, how profoundly disappointed I was in last year's Iran vote. I wasn't disappointed in the administration, I was disappointed in the American Jewish community. I felt deeply let down. 90% of Israelis, according to polls, opposed that deal. For many of us, this was an existential moment. And I always felt that at an existential moment, I could depend, for all of the differences between us, I could depend on American Jewry. And it didn't happen, and I don't know where to take that. I really don't know where to take that because I am now living in a completely different reality. I am living in a Middle East that has the shadow of a resurgent conventional power emerging in Iran with the threat down the line as soon as this deal expires for an almost certain nuclear Iran. And the American Jewish community as a whole, there were heroes in this community. AIPAC was extraordinary, and those of you who fought that fight, really thank you. But I feel let down by the American Jewish community. Now, when is the last time that an Israeli speaker was able to stand in front of an American audience and say and speak that bluntly? And so we need to be able to critique each other when necessary and move on and say, okay, this happened, and it doesn't detract for one moment from my love and commitment to the American Jewish community, but there it is, a deep divide that opened between us. To the positive. We need to learn each other's Jewish life. Without giving ourselves, or certainly each other, enough credit, each community is developing an extraordinary richness of Jewish life. What American Jews can teach us in Israel about Judaism are two things. The first is the freedom with which American Jews approach their Judaism. The notion that you are not owned by Judaism, but you own your Judaism. You can do whatever you want with Judaism because it's yours. In Israel, we have a very different attitude. We have this attitude of Ol HaTorah, the yoke of the Torah. And yes, we're proud to be Jews, but it's a burden. And the second related message that American Judaism has to teach us about how to live Jewishly is the joy that I experience among American Jews in your relationship to Judaism. And that is a totally foreign concept for Israelis. The notion that Judaism can be joyful. Judaism is many things. It can be inspiring, infuriating, it can be many things. But joyful is not really part of our understanding of what Judaism can give us. And I think what we have to offer American Jews is something of the depth of Judaism as it is emerging in Israel, in particular in Israeli culture. We are seeing an extraordinary emergence of a new genre of Jewish spiritual music coming through Israeli rock music. The leading exponents of Israeli rock, Barry Sakharov, Ehud Banai, Evyatar Banai, anybody named Banai, Meir Banai. There's this tremendous emergence of Jewish creativity, prayer. Israeli music is now about prayer. Much of Israeli music is about prayer. And so we have a great deal to teach each other, and we need to learn to speak a shared language, a shared Jewish language. I call it almost the new Yiddish. The new Yiddish is the encounter, and I'm using this metaphorically, between English and Hebrew. The vast majority of Jews today speak these two languages. And I would add parenthetically, and it's especially important for me to say this here to this audience, the community that I feel most close to, the Jewish community, are Israeli Americans. As an American Israeli, we are the communities that speak this new Yiddish. In fact, we even speak this way to our children in a mixture of English and Hebrew. But more profoundly, we are the two groups that know the two centers of Jewish life so intimately. And we need to, I believe, work together and be a bridge. And finally, the work that we have to do together is to reclaim the vitality of the Jewish story. If I were to come up with a one-line definition of who are the Jews, we are a story that we tell ourselves about who we think we are. That's why the seminal Jewish moment of the year, I think even more deeply than Yom Kippur, is the Seder. That's the moment when we all sit down and try to figure out again, what is this thing? What is this story? What does it mean to imagine yourself as if you left Egypt? One of the reasons I believe that we are so much on the defensive today from the anti-Israel onslaught is because we have become confused about our story. We're no longer quite sure what this story is about. Our enemies have a very clear idea of what this story is about. This is a story about evil. The Jewish story of the 20th century is a story that it is the embodiment of evil. And that is the story that is increasingly being told. And we don't have a counter narrative. And it's not it's not about better PR. It's about going deeply into ourselves as a people and starting to ask ourselves the hard questions again. Who are we? Why are we carrying a 4,000-year story? Why are we a people that has contiguous memory with all parts of human history going back to ancient times. There are very few, if any, peoples that can claim that. What is our responsibility as a people with such a long memory? What do we do with everything that we remember? And so that, I believe, is our greatest challenge, and neither community alone can meet that challenge. It's only by being together, by telling this story and retelling it anew and asking ourselves the hard questions, that we can begin to be worthy of the story and perhaps writing the next chapter. Thank you very much.